Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You are with me, Chris Reddington. Here we talk all things cloud, and we will be talking about one of my other favorite topics today, which is GitHub and automation. And it's going to be in maybe an avenue that isn't really a common thread or a common topic. Normally, when we hear GitHub, we think about developers, we think about apps, but we don't often hear so much about, let's say, governance and policies and role-based access control. So we're going to be doing things a little bit differently here this evening, and I am delighted to be joined by another rock star in the community, I must say, Mr. Marcel Lupo. Hey, Marcel.
Hi, thanks. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show tonight. And yeah, thanks for everyone tuning in, and I hope you'll enjoy the session. Like Chris said, it's going to be an interesting one. To show you that you can use GitHub not just for developing applications and stuff, but do more automation around operations and governance and security and stuff.
Awesome. Automation for everyone. Love it, love it, love it. So before we get started, I know many folks in the community will already know you anyway, but just in case we've got people tuning in who maybe haven't seen some of your blogs or some of your other work before, Marcel, who are you?
Alrighty, so my name's Marcel. Thank you again. I'm a DevOps MVP and also a DevOps and Solutions Architect working as a group manager at Avanade. I've been in the IT industry and technology industry about probably over 20 years now, and one of my strong passions are automation and how we can use technology to solve, complex business problems, how to make your life easier, from a networking person to an operations person to a security guy, developer, DevOps and things are everywhere. And I think it should be all inclusive as well. And when people say DevOps, I will think, oh, developers use this stuff, but it's not all that. So basically, I'm working in that space, Azure DevOps, GitHub, and trying to speak and blog about automation and just how you can make cool stuff happen and save yourself time, save yourself money. Maybe it is a interesting thing to be able to do, and it's not so difficult. And I'm here to basically help anyone. If you've got any questions or anything, you can come speak to me on Twitter. I have a blog as well. I've got a GitHub. A lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, will basically be on my GitHub as well. So yeah, thanks, Chris, for sharing this. It's just a little slide about where you can get me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or my blog is on Dev2 and my GitHub profile. I work as, like I said, a group manager at Avanade, and in my free time, I like to experiment and write blogs and do cool stuff around automation.
Best way to learn, in my opinion. I'm a big fan of that. Trying things out, figuring out what you've broken along the way, writing it back up, because so many times I've been on other videos with folks as well on vlogs, and we've kind of had that discussion of, oh yeah, I did that thing where I did something, forgot I did it, then I'm going to do that thing again, type it into my favorite search engine and find my previous blog post where I wrote about it. And it's like, there we go. Thanks, past self. I solved that problem once before.
Exactly. I like, it's the same with me. Like, for example, I see my blog and even my GitHub as almost like my own reference material for things that I've done, and sharing that with the community is really important, and having other people helping. This is one thing about GitHub that I really like, and it's very open source. It's not just open for open source software, but just general things now. And with GitHub Actions, you're able to write actions that, for the marketplace, for example, that can just be consumed by other people. Yep. I like to explain GitHub Actions as well. Like, I don't know if you work with Azure DevOps, you have you have the multi-stage YAML pipelines, and what I see a lot of people do is they'll write a main pipeline and then they'll write templates, which basically calls almost like sub pipelines of your main pipeline. But that's all closed, right? In Azure DevOps, most most orgs or enterprises use that, and no one can actually see those templates, and it's very, closed. But with GitHub Actions, I like to explain them almost like as those templates, but they're public, and anyone can call them and use them. And it's great. It's great.
That's one of my favorite things about GitHub Actions, actually. And this is maybe a spoiler for anyone who's going to hear me doing a talk coming up anytime soon. So take notes if you are. That's one of my favorite kind of quiz questions is, okay, so we're looking through all of this stuff here. Do you notice anything interesting about, this naming convention here, this user statement, the fact that it is just another GitHub repository? And as you say, it's all out there, it's all public. It's just a really neat way of bringing that, building on the strengths of GitHub, right? It's so well known for the open source side of things. Let's just keep building upon that and let the community drive it forward. So fully agree.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in today's topic, big DevOps and automation fan, and curious to see these non-typical use cases, I guess, more of this operational side than an application side. So yeah, excited to see what we have in store, Marcel. And I can see we've got a few folks watching on LinkedIn as well. So hello there, folks, as well. And Casey says, flying back from Madrid, catching it on the airport. So a solid way to pass the time, he says. So welcome. Thanks for joining. Awesome. So Marcel, over to you.
Alrighty, so I'll start off just I'm not a big slide fan, but I've got 2 or 3, so I won't bore you for too long with the slides. But I want to talk a little bit first about what is RBAC and why do we use it, especially in Azure. So basically role-based access controls are permissions in Azure that can you grant access. It's also known as IAM. So if you're typically working in Azure, you will have a resource group or resources, and you can go to the IAM, and you can give groups or users access, role-based, roles. And a role is basically made up of a few allow actions and disallow actions that are grouped together and in a role, and then you can add a group or user to that. Now, Azure is Microsoft is really generous, I would say. They make a lot of built-in roles, so people don't have to go and create their own roles, but which is great. And there's loads. I'll show. We're in the demo. We'll go a little bit more into that about the built-in roles. But there are a few challenges and risks with regards to using built-in roles, because sometimes you can basically come across a role or maybe a requirement in your operations day-to-day. Maybe there's a new team that needs a certain, specific set of permissions that are a little bit more granular, that just comes out of the box in a standard built-in RBAC Microsoft provided role. Sometimes built-in roles are not really sufficient, or they don't maybe even exist sometimes. So for example, I'll give you an example of that. So there's a Postgres SQL for Postgres in Azure. There's not really any roles for that database technology. So sometimes there might not even be a built-in role that you can use. So you're going to have to go and create one. So from an operational perspective, if you're or a security person, and you're going to have to create many of these custom roles, it can come very complicated to maintain, because now you have all these groups of roles, groups of permissions. Maybe you don't know what to name them, and it can just spiral out of control, and it's difficult. It's difficult to keep track of that. Now, when we look at a role, it is basically just a custom JSON structure that gives you a name, ID, whether it's custom or not, a description, some actions or not actions, data actions, not data actions, and assignable scopes. We'll go a little bit more into this in a bit. I just wanted to show you basically what the structure looks like, and it's just a JSON object. I want to talk a little bit about the actions versus not actions. If I just go back one slide. So you have actions are basically an array of settings or things that you can do and group together. And not actions is just the opposite of it. Now you can use things like wildcards and stuff like that, which I'll show in just a bit. But these actions and non-actions are more around the control pane of Azure. You also get data pane actions and not actions, which is just called data actions or not data actions. When it comes to the syntax that you can use, it's usually company.provider name / resource type / action. And I want to talk about the action, because you can have a wildcard that gives you all the actions, or read, write, or delete, and it very much ties into the API. So just for an example, here is a custom definition that I've created called a custom resource health reader. Now, ID, I've not given an ID because when you create a new role, it will generate a random ID. So you don't really have to specify that in the JSON object when you create them. You do specify whether it's custom or not, and you can give it a description. And you'll see here in the actions, we've got Microsoft.resource health / the resource type, I wanted any, and all the read actions. Now, I've got I'll explain this one. If I just jump back real quick, you'll see here, you've got company.provider name / resource type / action. And if I just actually come out of this for a moment and just quickly go into Azure here, when we talk about the resource providers, there are many resource providers. So for example, under compute, networking, storage, so say for example you want Microsoft storage, these are all the actions that you can do. So you can register action, read, check the name availability, read. So if you wanted to substitute all of the things of storage, you could use something like star. So when I say in my slide here, if I just go to the next slide here, here we go. If I look at the resource health, I'm saying anything of resource health, I just want read. So this is a kind of a custom resource health reader. And you can see in the descriptions here is I'm saying users with this right can view Azure resource service or subscription health. Now, the assignable scopes value, this is basically it doesn't apply the role like to a group or user or whatever. What this does is it just surfaces the role for consumption. So say, for example, you have multiple subscriptions, you can have even management groups. It's just where do you want the role to be surfaced so that you can consume it. And I've got some examples here as well. If I just quickly jump back into here, the assignable scopes can either be one subscription, it can be two comma separated subscriptions or more. It could be to specific resource groups or a management group. So there's different scopes where you can kind of apply or make this role
available to be used, I guess.
Yeah, available.
Gotcha. So I guess then we've got a mix of the actions, so like the individual API calls effectively that we could be doing. So like, hey, I want to be able to read a storage account or write to a storage account or an individual operation of some kind. We've then got the scopes of which we would be allowed to do those things, not necessarily assigning them yet, but that's where we could potentially apply them, like almost like a guardrail, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
So if you're running multiple subscriptions, you might need the role only at a certain subscription, and then you'll apply it there.
Gotcha.
Or surface it there, so make it usable in that subscription. I could say. Nice. I would say. Now, if you start creating many of these JSON objects, you can imagine maybe you have PowerShell or scripts, or you're going to end up with so many of these, and you'll probably lose track of it, to be honest, because it's quite granular. Now, the solution to this is to basically apply DevOps and automate. So you can automate custom role definitions, and it will ease the administration quite a bit. You can seamlessly create role definitions on the fly through like automation processes like using GitHub Actions, which I'm going to show you how to do that. you can also make Git the source of truth. So for example, all these custom role definitions, you can store them in a Git repo, and they will kind of just be your source of truth, really, to be honest. You can use your same DevOps practices, branching strategies, developing or getting, new. I would say if you build an application you call new features, you could create new roles and they can be merged into your main branch, and that can then run a pipeline that creates those. And this is exactly what we're going to do. So I would like to call this permissions or security as code. That allows for, it's going to centralize management of the role definitions and can really, really simplify the process involved in maintaining those things, because it can be completely crazy. So what I'm going to do is I've bored you enough with slides here, so I want to actually show this.
Some good context setting and scene setting there. And before you jump in as well, I just want to jump in with one extra thing, which is I like the analogy of kind of security or permissions as code that you said, because it got me thinking actually the path we're about to embark on here. And I'll share a link in the chat, and I'll post it on screen as well for anyone interested. But I think what we're going to be talking about here is very similar to something that GitHub actually open sourced back in June of this year, something called entitlements. And the reason I bring this up is you got me just kind of smiling and thinking about how we do things internally in GitHub with the whole kind of, I need access to this tool or this thing or, this group or whatever it is. That's, having that truth, having that one version of what everything's going on is in the repository, and it is there, and it's got to go through those approvals and those manager approvals as well. So yeah, really excited to see how we do something similar with Azure role definitions and RBAC here as well. Sounds cool.
Yeah, definitely. So I've jumped into a repo that I already have set up. Just let me know, is that big enough? I can try and make it a tiny bit bigger.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So it's a very basic structure repo. I have a git ignore file, a license file, a README file. I have a scripts folder and a role definitions folder. Now, this is just if you wanted to go and do this today in your environment, I've made this repo like a template, so you can just kind of copy. I'll actually do that. So,
nice.
In my GitHub, which is pwd 9000ml, you can find this Azure role definitions template, and you can kind of build this in your own environment. But what I'll do is I'm going to say use this template, and I'm just going to call it automate RBAC, just maybe demo. And I'm going to give this, and I'm going to say, this is my RBAC roles for Azure automation or something like that. I'm going to make that public, but you can then, you can obviously make this private. And I'm just going to create a repository from this template, just so that I can show you fresh from the start how to do this. I'll also just quickly show you my Azure subscription here. Now, when we look at IAM, if I go into the IAM access controls and I go to role assignments, if I go to roles, here are all those built-in roles that I was talking about earlier. And there are literally loads of these, like loads and loads and loads and loads. And you can actually filter them by, either by category or whether they're built-in or whether they're custom. And you'll see here that I don't have any custom roles. And this is what we're going to basically use our GitHub repo to build those custom roles. Now, if you look, here's my new repository. I want to go and quickly jump into the role definitions folder here. And here is that same example that I showed a bit earlier, where I have my GitHub custom resource health reader.json. And you'll see here that, it's exactly the same as what I said, what we did earlier. But now what I wanted to show you is the actions workflow, or how we're actually going to apply this. So in my GitHub folder, there is, for those of you who have not used GitHub Actions, you have this special folder in a repo that's called .github. And in that folder, you have a folder called Workflows. And then you can have I almost like to call them, like in Azure DevOps, you have those multi-stage YAML pipelines. And the thing is with GitHub Actions, it also has a YAML schema, same as Azure DevOps Pipelines does. That schema is very, very similar. So, I mean, if you're used to writing Azure DevOps YAML pipelines, you will be so, at ease with GitHub Actions, because the schema and pipeline is very well documented and is very similar. So, it's nothing like you're going to go and have to learn a completely new language or anything. The schemas are so similar. Now, if we have a look at this actions, by having this YAML file, I just want to quickly point out, at the top of your repo, you'll have an actions tab. So if you have that special folder with workflows and you have a YAML pipe or a GitHub actions in there, you'll actually see your GitHub action in your actions here, and you can trigger them manually or based on certain things, like if there is a pull request or a push to the repo. But I want to show you the code of that pipeline real quickly, just to show you kind of what we're going to do. So this YAML GitHub action workflow is called RBAC apply, and you'll see here I've got a trigger, and my trigger means just when do I want this automation to run. And you'll see here that it's when I'm pushing any changes to a path called role definitions. Now, if I just quickly jump back to my code repository, you'll see that I've created a folder called role definitions, and in here is one custom role. So any changes that I'm going to make to this custom role and push to my repo is going to basically trigger this workflow to run, or this GitHub action. You can also put I think it's workflow dispatch, where you can then run these manually. I've not done that in this case, but you can do that as well. And then jobs. Jobs for me is synonymous to stages in YAML pipeline. So you have jobs running. My job's called publish. I can say what it runs on. So Windows, Ubuntu. I can have self-hosted. Same as DevOps. Again, you can have your self-hosted runner, or in DevOps they're called the Azure Pipelines agent. But you can have them. They're called runners in DevOps. In GitHub, or you can use the GitHub managed images, which is Ubuntu, Windows, same as Azure DevOps, as your tooling built in and stuff. So the steps, the first step is just going to check out my repository, and that uses a checkout action. The next action is going to basically run an interesting thing where I'm going to, because remember in my role definitions folder, I could have 1, 2, 3, I can have 10 role definitions. But I just want to kind of pick up, when I'm creating new ones or amending existing ones, I only want the ones that's changed, because those are potentially the ones that I'm going to deploy or update. So what I'm doing in this step here is I'm looking for what files actually changed. When I did changes and I pushed those changes to my Git repository, what files exactly changed, which YAML. So in my case, my GitHub, my RBAC role is as an object. I'm saying which of those roles got created or changed. And I'm doing that by using a git diff command. And all I'm getting is just the file, what file has changed. Then I'm logging into Azure. We'll set up an Azure credential. So our Azure, this is for this action to be able to log into Azure and do stuff like create roles or amend roles, for example, is what we want to do. So we need to, first of all, authenticate into our Azure to be able to do that. And then once I've got those files that has changed, I am going to read that into an environment variable, which is basically just a long string of JSON files that has changed. And I'm going to split them. So I'm going to make an array of files. And then I'm going to tell it where is my repository that's being checked out. I'm going to say for each of the roles that were created, give me the directory name. And so I'm creating file paths. Now, what's interesting is so when we're creating this file paths, what I'm actually doing is I'm going to create a PowerShell string. The thing is with Azure, with GitHub, when you're creating environment variables, is there's no object type. The object type is basically string. But what I'm doing is my list of files that have changed, I'm actually going to create so in PowerShell, we define an array as @ and then brackets, and then we have basically our array inside of that. So what I'm actually doing is I'm creating a string value that looks like an array, a PowerShell array. And then I'm saying, run my PowerShell script using role definitions. And I'm actually just piping that all of those file names, all of those JSON file names that has either been created or changed into my script. And if we take a quick look at that script next, we have a look in here, you'll see that I have a parameter. I only have one parameter, and it's an array. It's a PowerShell array of role definitions. But because this array is coming from a GitHub Actions workflow, it's not going to be an array object type, and that's why it's almost like a string. And the string is formed like if I have to just quickly show you in Notepad here. I don't know why that is showing, but an array in PowerShell is like something like that. Something like this one @ 1, 2, 3. So what I'm actually doing is I'm just mimicking that array of my files, and then basically piping that into my script there. Just one sec. Sorry about that. I just running out of battery, so I just plug that in. So what I'm then doing with that array of JSON objects is I'm saying, for each of those job objects, convert the JSON file into an object which I can actually use. And then I'm saying, check my assignable scopes. Remember I said earlier in the assignable scopes, I can have either it's being surfaced at a subscription or a set of subscriptions or a management group. So what I'm doing is I'm actually checking if it's at the management group. I'm basically just checking, does this role already exist? If it exists, I've made some changes, so I obviously have to update it. But if it doesn't exist, then create it. So I'm just doing a little bit of logic here to say, does my role exist at the management group? If it doesn't, create it. If it does, update it. And I'm doing the same, if it's not a management group assignable scope, if it's at the subscription layer, do that in the subscription layer. So let's quickly set this up and show you in action how this works. So like I said, when I started off, there is one thing that we do need before we can actually start, and that is that GitHub secret to be able to authenticate into Azure. And our secret is basically just going to be a service principal. So again, if you're familiar with Azure DevOps, when you write Azure DevOps pipelines, you have this concept of a service connection, and that service connection is essentially a service principal in Azure that authenticates your pipeline to be able to run, and that service principal has certain permissions and stuff. So what I've done here is I've written a little PowerShell script just to make this a bit easier. I'm just going to quickly log in into my Azure tenant. So just bear with me one moment there. Just going to pick that one. And I'm in. And I'm just going to set my subscription and just make sure that I'm connected to the right subscription. And I am. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call my service principal or app GitHub RBAC admin. So I'm just going to call my service principal that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my service principal management group reader over the subscription where I'm going to want to expose roles. Why do I want management group reader? Well, remember my script needs to be able to evaluate whether the role is for a management group or a subscription. And for this reason, I need to give this, when I create the service principal, I need to give it management group reader. In addition, I'm also going to give it user access administrator. The reason I need to give it user access administrator is so that I can actually create roles with my GitHub action. Now, when I run this, these two commands, I'll show you what happens here. It just gives a warning about the SDK. You could just ignore that. But what's happening now is it's creating that. Actually, let me jump into my Azure, Azure AD, and I can actually show you. So in Azure Active Directory, under app registrations, you will now see that I have got, I'll refresh that.
You were too quick into the Azure portal, I think.
It's definitely there. I mean, okay, so
there you go.
So what I'll do, actually, so what this command does is it basically creates another JSON object. Now, this I would keep obviously safe. So I'm just going to copy this once. But what we need to do in GitHub is, if I just quickly jump to GitHub, to my new repository here, we'll just jump to the settings. And then now remember, if I just quickly show you the workflow again, what I'm going to use, or what this is going to use to authenticate to Azure, is a secret. And that secret needs to be called Azure credentials. Now, you could essentially call it something different, but I just like to call it that. So how we set that up is under the repository settings, we can go to secrets, and we'll go to actions secrets. And we're going to create a new repository secret, and we're going to call that Azure credentials. And we're just going to paste that JSON object in there. But we don't need all of the stuff. We only need the first four things, which is the client ID, the actual secret, the subscription, and the tenant. And we're just going to add that secret, that Azure let me see, credentials. Yeah, I'm going to add that.
That's good. And if I jump in for a sec here, maybe as a little bonus tip for people as well while we're just on that spot. Did you know, Marcel, and I've just disconnected my headphones, so bear with me whilst I plug myself back in. There we go. Did you know that there's actually a way that you can authenticate to Azure without secrets as well, so without a password?
Yes, I think I saw that. What is it called? The is it Open Connect or Open
ID Connect?
Open
exactly.
ID Connect. That's
So
right. Yeah.
If you jump into your app registrations again, and hopefully it'll be there now. we've delayed enough time to let it appear in the portal.
There we go.
There you go. So if you just click onto that one, whereas normally you have like your token configuration on the left hand side there. Sorry, not that one. Certificates and secrets, I should say, the one above. So where you have that one, which is your secret key, notice above you've got the tab for federated credentials.
Oh, yeah.
So you can click that thing in there. One of the kind of trusted sources you can use is a GitHub repository. And then there's some guidance in the Azure login task then to go and basically put that together. So you do not even need a secret as well, which is awesome. But,
amazing.
There we go.
That is really, really good. I'm going to try that out. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
that's amazing. So, all right, cool. So, I mean, that's our secret set up. Now, there is something else that we need to do here. If we look at this kind of, I don't know, demo action, I guess, that I created, or not the demo action. I mean, that's our GitHub action sorted. If we look at the kind of the demo role that I want to create, you'll see here that I've not actually put my subscription where I want to do it. Now, one really awesome thing about GitHub, and I don't know if any of you use code spaces. I mean, this is something that is not a code space, but if you go to the root of your repo, and this can be in your any account, your free account, doesn't matter. If you press dot, what this will actually do is it will open up Visual Studio Code in the browser. So I can actually go and make changes. I don't need a IDE or Visual Studio Code installed on my machine or anything. I just press dot and it opens VS Code. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And it just opens VS Code in my web browser. So all I really want to do here, now remember that GitHub workflow, right? That's going to, once I make changes to any files in my role definitions, it's going to trigger this workflow. And I'm going to do just that. But I'm kind of happy with this resource. So I'm just going to add in my subscription ID here. So let's take a quick look. So I want it to go to this subscription here. I'm just going to grab the subscription ID. Now, remember I said earlier, you can have 1 subscription, 2, 3, however many you want to make the role available to. If we look at roles here, we'll see that earlier that I don't have any custom roles. Now, in GitHub, if I go and update my role definition with where I want to surface this role, I'm just going to write a message here. I'm going to say added first role, and I'm going to save that. Now, if I commit, this automatically saves it. I'm not using any branching strategy here or anything. I just kind of want to show you how that works. If I go back now, hit the back button, let's go back to the repo. You can see that my role definition is now updated with the subscription. But also, if I go to actions, you'll see that that action has actually kicked off. So what it's doing now is it's evaluating, right, which files changed. So 1 file changed. So what it's doing, we can actually see it step through here. So it's getting the, it's checking out the repository, and then it's going, which files changed? The file that's changed, it's going to, here it's actually logging into Azure. And it's going to authenticate using that service principal that's got management group reader and user access administrator. So that's now authenticating into Azure. I'm going to try the federated credential a bit later. Definitely want to see that. But that's logging in now. It takes a few seconds.
I really love where this is going. The fact that that is the source of truth for your custom roles. You don't have to worry anymore about who's kind of created what, giving the right level of access, etc. And it's all, you can apply all of those great principles that we know from development practices, like your branch policies and everything else, get your reviewers in there to make sure they approve. And you could even, do some really clever things as well, like nesting folders and assigning code owners to different folders and things to make sure certain reviewers do things as well. So this is really cool. I really, really like this.
Yeah, exactly. And you see here that string object that I was talking about.
Nice.
You see it's created that almost like PowerShell string. Where was it now? Get role definitions.
Yes, there it is. Yeah. I think it was at the bottom of that next task there.
Yes. So, it goes what files changed. And then what it's going to do is it basically, when it's going to create or update the definition, it's going to tell me that, it doesn't exist. The role definition doesn't exist. So it's going to create it. And you can see here, the role definition does not exist, and it's created it there. Now, if we go and look into Azure, you will see, if I refresh my subscription and go to IAM, go to roles, go to custom role, and there you'll see there's my custom role definition.
Nice.
So if we view the details, remember, if I just quickly jump back to it, and I wanted to show you this just real quickly, at the beginning, we were talking about the usage of wildcard, right? So we're using a wildcard here that says anything for resource health, give us read. Now, if we go and look at the actual permissions that this role has got, it's got everything from resource health, that is read. You see there is all my read get, and this is, I can even see the JSON object, the assignments, where it's assigned. Now remember I said it's not assigned yet. So this only makes it available to me. So say for example now a team comes to me, an ops team that says we need access over a resource group to see the resources health in there. Say for example, I don't know, this one, demo ACA GitHub runners RG. I can go to the IAM, I can go to role assignments. I can say add role assignment, and I can say I want to use that custom role, and because I'm in this subscription, it's now available to me. And that's the whole point of the assignable scopes. It makes it available to me to use. So I can say I want this group or user or group of users to have that permission on that resource group. Now I just want to quickly show you, just to show that it's not like any smoke or mirrors here. What I'm going to quickly do is I'm just going to hit dot again here, and I actually created another custom role earlier, and I'm going to call this one, custom VM operator, because just for those of you who don't know, if you're unfamiliar with creating your own roles. If you go, for example, this is so well documented, but if you go, for example, to the Azure reference for built-in roles, if I just quickly show you, there, those roles that I said earlier, that there are loads and loads and loads of them. Every single one of them, believe it or not, is documented. So, for example, say you're looking for a certain role, but it doesn't exist, or more or less what you want. I want a role that can give my admins or my team the ability to maybe stop and start VMs, but not create VMs or delete VMs. Now, if I look at virtual machine, for example, I have virtual machine administrator and I have virtual machine contributor. But if I click on virtual machine contributor, it gives me all of these permissions. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute. I don't want people to be able to create VMs. I don't want people to be able to delete VMs. But this, if I give them virtual machine contributor, they're going to be able to build and, delete VMs. I don't want that. But what's nice is I can see the permissions that is involved in this group. And if I scroll to the bottom, it actually gives me almost like a JSON version of this, of this role. So what I've done is I've actually copied that role and I've stripped it down a little bit. And I call this GitHub custom VM operator. So just jumping back really quick to my repo here, I'm just going to go on create a new file, and I'm just going to call this GitHub custom VM operator .json. So I'm creating a new role, and I'm just going to paste that in. And you see here, users with rights to only turn VMs on and off. And you'll see here, I give them read, compute read, deallocate action, start action, redeploy action, and restart action. No building, no create VM or delete VM or what. Literally just be able to read insights, maybe networking, and the ability to stop and start VMs. Now remember, my subscription where I want to surface it is going to be this one. And I'm going to just add that here. Now, on my previous role that I created, we spoke about the actions, for example, to give actions. Now, I'm giving read actions to everything. But say, for example, you wanted to have a not action. So if we just go to resource health, oops, I'll go Microsoft.resource health. I just want to find that provider. I think, is that the provider? It's this one here. I'm just going to quickly try and find this provider. Here we go. So I've given all the read action, but say, for example, I don't want people to be able to read events, just a single one. What I can do here, remember, it's an array, and I'm just going to say, I want people to be able to read everything for resource health, but I don't want people to read events, and that's where the not actions come in. So you can see here I've created a new role and I've kind of amended an existing role. And what's nice now about this is if I go and update this, I'm going to say change role plus add role. I'm just going to run that, commit that. And here's now where the beauty comes in. It's going to do that. But now, one thing I wanted to show with regards to the source of truth, right? Say you're a team of security engineers or IT engineers, and you're all working on this repo, and you're doing your pull request from your branches or whatever, and all of a sudden a permission has changed, and you don't know, oh my goodness, who's changed what? This role was there yesterday. People could read events, but today people can't read events. What's happened? So what you can then do is go to this Git repo, and you can actually go to the history, and you can go and see what has changed. This is the whole beauty of source control and having your permissions as code as your source of truth, because now you have a full track and versioning of your permissions and stuff, right?
And I think that answers Oliver's question, which I just brought up on screen here, which is what are some practical use cases for this? Is it only for version control in custom roles, or is there a use case for standard roles? And I think, standard roles are kind of, they're part of the platform. You can consume them if you like. This particular example is you showing how you could do, a very nice source of truth for your custom roles. But I think what this also demonstrates, if you kind of think outside the box as well, is that this is one application of using permissions as code and kind of policy as code. You could have your Azure policies, for example, in a version control environment, and then push those up. For example, you could do it for your role-based access control assignments. Probably, I don't know. There's so many operational kind of scenarios that you could go and use this kind of approach, which
exactly, yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, it's not limited. I mean, it's absolutely not limited to role-based or custom role definitions. You could potentially, if you think a little bit outside of the box, like Chris says, you can use this. You can apply this to your policies, perhaps, or any sort of, laborious, complex automation that you're doing manually through PowerShell scripts or whatever. You can kind of incorporate the same sort of technique. I want to say like that you can. I'm actually talking to another DevOps enthusiast as well, who's currently writing self-service or wants to write a GitHub Actions to self-service, for example, the creation of service principles, for example. So where you can have your service principles as kind of a repository of when they're created, when they're valid, when to rotate the passwords, and things like that you can very easily lose track of or lose control of. But yeah, so just to quickly show you here, once this is logged in, that is going in, and it should come here into changed files. There is one gotcha that I've not really, but this code can be improved, of course. But one thing I want to touch on that about this solution is, for example, when you're removing files. So for example, say you need to remove roles. So my solution here will only show how to create or update roles. But when you want to remove a role, you just delete the JSON file, and then you'll have to just go and manually delete it in Azure. I mean, there is probably some clever way to do it. I've just not thought that, but I mean, that's the whole point. It's like, this is public, people can improve it.
Just about to say the same thing. This is all public and open source. Anyone can go and make a change to that if they like. If they've got the thought process and already can think, oh, why don't we do it this way? That's a pull request away. So I think that's a challenge laid down for someone out there, Marcel. Right?
Exactly. Okay, so you can see here now, there is my array. Oops. You'll see now there's two files, right? So it's the @array, because that one's changed, my new role. So it's quite nice. It's only taking roles I've changed. So again, what's really nice is if you build up your roles in here, you might start building them up. You might have 10, 20, 30, 40. Each time that you make a change, your changes will only be applied or created by the ones that you actually work off. So it's not going to recreate all of your roles every time, because we're kind of cleverly getting only the files that's changed or the new ones. And that is now finished. And if we go into Azure again here, under the subscription, go to IAM, we can go to the roles, go to custom roles, and you'll see now here's my VM operator. If I go into that one, if I go and view the details of it, you can see there's the JSON for it, and you can see all the permissions, all the granular permissions for it. And just to show you that the other one has changed, sorry, went back a bit too far there. So if we go to resource health, now you will see that my actions doesn't include the events one, because under not actions, I've said I don't want the event read. So the events read action is no longer being displayed for me over here. Nice. And here's a different tab for your data actions as well. And again, like I said, once you start consuming this role, you can actually even see the assignment. So yep. where this role is being assigned. At the moment, I've not assigned it to anything. And yeah, I mean, that's really, there is to it. And, by doing this, you have now your role definitions in one place, central place. You don't have to go and run a script or write a script every time. You literally just come in here, make your changes, and automatically GitHub Actions will take care of it, and it will be there.
Awesome. No, Marcel, thank you. I think, we were speaking before going live about how I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of making things like these DevOps principles and automation more accessible for folks outside of that dev space. And yeah. I think this is just such a great example of showing how actually, even on the upside, I think there's sometimes this misnomer maybe of I'm ops, I don't want to even look at code or think about a repository or anything like that. But actually, there is value in bringing those principles across, and everyone can benefit from some of these things we've learned in the dev space and apply them maybe in some more creative ways. So yeah, really, really great session, Marcel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Was there like any questions or anything? I think it was just the one.
Yeah, I think we've answered them as we went along. Actually, I think it was that one in particular, and yeah, I think it was that main one around practical use cases. But I think the real core thing behind what I see here, at least, and feel free to correct me if I'm misinterpreting at all, is this is just one application of showing the power of what you can do from an ops perspective with all of these kind of automation tools and version control. And if you kind of paint the end-to-end picture that you've got a repository, you're using inner sourcing principles so anyone can access it, but you've got branch policies on there, so you've got certain reviewers that must go and review it. And then you make your pull requests, that gets merged, that then becomes a central way of empowering everyone, rather than having, let's say, that barrier in terms of being able to contribute and being able to fall into the pits of success, as they say. So yeah, I really, really like what I've seen here, Marcel. Really nice demo.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I hope it's been beneficial for the viewers. It just shows you that GitHub is not just, again, like for developers building apps and doing stuff like that. You can apply DevOps to anything, everything, security, permissions as code, operations, you name it. It's open to everyone, and open source, makes GitHub a really, really collaborative open space where people can, ops people, IT people, security people, they can all jump in and get their hands dirty and write awesome stuff.
Awesome. Marcel, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have to start playing with some other ideas for putting the ops into DevOps for whatever other scenarios we've got as well here. So,
Yeah.
no, awesome session. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing how this develops. This is going to be one to keep an eye on, I think.
Awesome. Thank you very much again. Thanks for having me. And yeah, thanks to the viewers. Hope you'll have a wonderful evening. Again, check out my GitHub. Go check that repo out. Clone it, mash it, smash it, whatever, yeah, just enjoy.
There we go. And I've brought that up on screen one more time here as well. That GitHub repository URL there. But Marcel, thank you so much. So there we go, folks. We have been looking at DevOps tooling, particularly focusing on GitHub Actions here, looking at how we can use GitHub, version control, GitHub Actions, and all of those principles we've learned from the development practices, I suppose, to go and make our ops lives easier. Really awesome application. I'd love to see maybe what other creative applications you have out there as well. So if you've been thinking about something similar, get in touch with Marcel, get in touch with me. I'm sure we'd love to carry on the discussion here a little bit more. But that's it for today, folks. In terms of what's coming up next, I think on Tuesday we won't be doing a tool update. This coming Tuesday, I was wrong what I said this Tuesday. It'll be the week after. So I'll be in September, the next one. And then I think we'll have another session coming out on Thursday as well. So until then, folks, see you later. And I hope that you have an enjoyable weekend, an enjoyable time. And see you very soon. Bye for now.